A waitress with a tray is not going to lecture me about $1 billion company. The words landed softly, almost politely, and somehow that made them colder. Around the private dining room of the Aurelia room, forks paused halfway to mouths. Wine glasses hovered above white linen, and the low jazz from the hidden speakers suddenly sounded too elegant for what had just happened. Ethan Caldwell did not raise his voice. Men like him rarely had to. He stood at the head of a polished walnut table on the 62nd floor of a Manhattan tower, his silver cuff links catching the city lights, his tailored navy suit cut with the confidence of someone who had never been asked to prove he belonged anywhere. Behind him, a wall-sized screen glowed with charts, projections, and the bright blue logo of Caldwell Meridian Group, the investment empire he had built into a name that made bankers sit straighter. Across from him sat Julian Cross, the kind of investor whose signature could move $600 million before dessert. Beside Ethan, his chief operating officer, Victoria Lane, smiled with the sharp little curve of a woman who enjoyed watching doors close in other people's faces. And near the edge of the room, holding a crystal pitcher of ice water with both hands, stood Maya Brooks, the black waitress nobody had bothered to look at twice. Her uniform was simple: black blouse, black slacks, white apron, hair pulled neatly back, name tag pinned above her heart. Maya, for letters in plain silver print, ignored all night by people who knew the names of vineyards in Napa, ski resorts in Aspen, and private schools in Connecticut, but somehow could not remember the name of the woman refilling their glasses. To them, she was movement without meaning. A hand placing plates, a shadow clearing crumbs, a quiet yes, sir, a soft right away, ma'am. Earlier, Victoria had snapped her fingers without looking up and called her sweetheart. One executive had asked if she could bring someone who understood the wine list, even though Maya had recommended the bottle he later praised as excellent. Another had laughed when she glanced at the screen for half a second, whispering that servers always looked so serious around numbers they could not understand. Maya had heard every word. She always did. She had learned long ago that invisible people hear the truth more often than powerful people think. So when Ethan began explaining his new predictive model, when he praised its ability to identify the most profitable customers in America, when the room leaned in as if they were witnessing the future being born, Maya did not mean to speak. She only meant to pour water, step back, and finish the shift without giving anyone another reason to make her small. But then she saw the slide. One variable missing. One sample distorted. One beautiful, expensive mistake dressed up as innovation. Her fingers tightened around the pitcher. Her breath slowed. The city glittered beyond the glass like nothing was wrong. Ethan smiled at Julian and said the model would change the market within 12 months. And Maya, still standing behind a chair no one had offered her, heard herself say, quietly but clearly, "Sir, your model is biased." The room turned. Not quickly, slowly, like a courtroom realizing the witness had just changed the case. Victoria let out a small laugh, thin as cracked ice. Ethan stared at Maya for the first time that night, not at her hands, not at her apron, but at her face. And then he said the sentence that would follow him for the rest of his life. A waitress with a tray is not going to lecture me about $1 billion company. Maya looked at the screen, then at the men who had mistaken silence for ignorance. She placed the pitcher down with care, not a drop spilling onto the linen. "No," she said, her voice calm enough to frighten the room. But the woman who wrote her doctoral dissertation on predictive bias in executive decision-making might. For one full second, no one inside the Aurelia room moved. The sentence did not explode. It sank. It slipped beneath the marble floors, under the polished table, behind every expensive smile, and found the part of the room that knew exactly what had just happened. Maya Brooks had not shouted. She had not performed. She had simply placed the truth on the table like a bill no one wanted to pay. Ethan Caldwell kept his eyes on her, his expression still controlled, but something small had changed near his jaw. A tightening. A flicker. The first crack in a man who had built his life on never looking surprised. Victoria Lane recovered first because people like Victoria were trained to turn embarrassment into strategy. She gave a soft laugh and lifted one hand as if dismissing smoke. "That is a very impressive sentence," she said, smiling toward Julian Cross. "But this is a private executive discussion." Maya looked at her, calm and steady. "Then it should be discussed carefully." The room seemed to inhale. Julian, who had spent the evening listening more than speaking, slowly lowered his glass. He was an older man with silver hair, a quiet voice, and the kind of wealth that did not need decoration. He had not laughed when Ethan insulted her. He had watched. That was different. Watching meant something had reached him. Ethan turned slightly, putting his body between Maya and the screen, as if the slide belonged to him by physical claim. "Miss Brooks," he said, finally reading her name tag. "I respect confidence. But confidence is not expertise." There it was again. Not rage. Not cruelty dressed in noise. Something cleaner and more dangerous. A polished kind of dismissal. Maya had heard versions of it her whole life. In classrooms. In interviews. In elevators where people assumed she was lost. At conferences where someone asked whose assistant she was while her research sat printed in their folders. She had learned that some people did not need to call you unqualified. They only needed to sound surprised when you were not. Outside the glass walls, Manhattan glittered beneath them, yellow taxis moving like sparks 62 floors below. Inside, the air smelled of roasted salmon, truffle butter, and money pretending to be taste. The Aurelia room was designed to make powerful people feel even more powerful. Private entrance. Private elevator. Private staff. A place where no one ordinary was supposed to become important unless they were serving something. Maya had been working there for 8 months. 5 nights a week, sometimes 6. She knew which guests tipped well, which ones said please only when other people were listening, which ones confused kindness with weakness. She also knew how people spoke when they thought the help had no history. But Maya had history. She had spent 7 years inside lecture halls, research labs, and grand offices that smelled like coffee and printer ink. She had defended a dissertation with a fever and 2 hours of sleep because her younger brother Samuel had been in physical therapy that same morning, gripping parallel bars and trying to take 3 steps without falling. She had earned every letter before her name in rooms that still made her prove she deserved the chair she was sitting in. And after all of that, after the degree, after the papers, after the recommendations, she was standing in a white apron while a billionaire decided her mind was impossible because her job was visible. Ethan glanced back at the slide, then at Julian. "We can move on," he said. "The model has already been reviewed." Maya did not move. "By whom?" Victoria's smile disappeared by half an inch. Ethan blinked once. "Excuse me." Maya lifted her chin toward the glowing chart behind him. "Who reviewed the exclusion criteria?" "Because whoever did missed the pattern. Your training data is not just incomplete. It is selecting against entire neighborhoods, and if you deploy it as written, your company will not be predicting customer behavior. It will be automating discrimination and calling it strategy." The last word landed harder than the first. This time, no one laughed. The silence after Maya spoke was not empty. It was crowded with everything the room had tried not to see. Julian leaned forward, elbows near the edge of the table, his eyes no longer lazy with wealth, but narrow with attention. One of his attorneys stopped scrolling on her tablet. A young analyst in a gray suit looked at the screen, then down at his notes, then back at Maya, as if the floor had shifted under his chair. Ethan noticed all of it, and that was what bothered him most. Not Maya. Not yet. The loss of control. "That is a serious accusation," he said. His voice stayed smooth, but the warmth had left it. Maya nodded once. "It is a serious slide." Victoria stepped beside him, heels clicking softly against the floor. "Maya, is it?" she asked, saying the name like it had been borrowed from somewhere beneath her. "You seem bright, but this is proprietary work. You are seeing one presentation page without context." "I am seeing enough," Maya said. "No," Victoria replied, still smiling for the room. "You are seeing colors, charts, and words that sound important." A few people looked away, not because the line was clever, because it was cruel in the quiet way powerful rooms preferred. Ethan did not correct her. That was the second insult. Sometimes the deepest disrespect is not what someone says. It is what the person in charge allows to remain in the air. Maya felt the old heat rise behind her ribs, the familiar burn of being reduced in public and expected to stay grateful for the paycheck. She thought of Samuel back in Queens, probably asleep on the couch with his physical therapy brace beside him, the television still glowing blue across the apartment wall. She thought of the unpaid hospital statements stacked in a drawer. She thought of the University of Chicago library at 2 in the morning, where she used to fall asleep over regression tables while snow gathered against the windows. She had not survived all of that to be frightened by a woman with a title and a polished smile. The context makes it worse, Maya said. Julian's attorney looked up completely now. Ethan exhaled through his nose. Then explain it. Victoria turned sharply. Ethan. He lifted one hand without looking at her. He wanted the room back. He thought giving Maya enough rope would expose her. That was the mistake arrogant people made when they confused silence with emptiness. Maya stepped closer to the screen, careful not to touch the table, careful not to seem like she was asking permission from people who had never offered it. Your model claims to predict high-value customers based on purchase history, location stability, credit behavior, and service engagement. But the slide shows your training sample excludes accounts with irregular billing cycles, short-term address changes, and low initial credit utilization. The young analyst went pale. Maya continued, her voice measured, each word clean enough for every phone in the room to remember. Those exclusions do not remove noise. They remove working-class customers, new immigrants, younger renters, military families between assignments, and people in neighborhoods your company already underserves. Then the model learns that stability equals value and struggle equals risk. After that, your sales team trusts the output, your pricing team follows the ranking, and your legal department spends the next 3 years pretending the harm was accidental. No one touched their food. The salmon cooled under gold-rimmed plates. Ice melted quietly in crystal glasses. Ethan turned to the analyst. Is that true? The analyst opened his mouth, then closed it. That was enough. Julian Cross sat back slowly, the investor mask slipping from his face. Victoria's smile was gone now. Maya looked at Ethan, not angry, not triumphant, just steady. You asked who reviewed it, she said. I am asking who was ignored. And for the first time that night, Ethan Caldwell had no answer ready. The question hung above the table brighter than the chandelier. Who was ignored? It was simple. It was dangerous. It was the kind of question that did not need volume because it had weight. Ethan Caldwell looked from Maya to the analyst, then to the glowing screen behind him, and the room that had belonged to him only minutes earlier began to feel borrowed. His own people were avoiding his eyes. That alone told him more than any confession could. Julian Cross folded his hands, his face unreadable now in the way only serious money could become unreadable. I would like to hear her finish, he said. 6 words. Quiet. Final. Victoria's head turned toward him too fast. Julian, with respect, we have a full technical review scheduled after dinner. Then consider this the appetizer, Julian replied. No one laughed, but something shifted. Permission had changed sides. Maya did not smile. She did not enjoy the humiliation blooming across Victoria's face. She knew too well what it felt like to be cornered by a room. Justice was not the same as revenge. Justice had steadier hands. Ethan reached for the remote and froze the slide on the screen. All right, he said, his voice lower now. Explain the exposure. That was the first honest thing he had said to her all night. Not polite, not kind, but honest. Maya looked at the table. May I have a pen? For a moment, no one moved. Then Julian's attorney slid one across the linen as if passing evidence in a trial. Maya picked up the back of a dinner menu and turned it over. The Aurelia Room logo shimmered in gold at the top, all elegance and no space for error. She wrote quickly, not beautifully, numbers and arrows moving beneath her hand with a precision that made the analyst sit forward in spite of himself. Your model gives heavier value to payment consistency than customer growth, she said. That sounds neutral until you remember consistency is easier for people who already have stability. Then your acquisition team targets customers who look safe, your lending partners reward the same pattern, and your pricing structure quietly raises barriers for everyone else. You do not have to intend discrimination to scale it. Ethan's eyes dropped to the menu. For the first time, he was not looking at her apron. He was following her logic. Maya circled one figure. This number is where the risk begins. You are projecting 12-month profitability from a sample that excludes the very customers most likely to grow if given fair access. You are not measuring value. You are measuring proximity to privilege and mistaking it for intelligence. The words did not cut. They clarified. That made them worse. Julian's attorney began typing rapidly. The analyst finally whispered, that matches the variance problem from last month. Victoria turned on him. Daniel. He swallowed. We never resolved it. Ethan heard the words as if they came from far away. Last month. Not theoretical. Not imaginary. Not a waitress reaching above her place. A real flaw. A known flaw. A flaw his own team had carried into a $600 million dinner because the room had been too busy admiring itself to listen. Maya placed the pen down. If you sign tonight, Mr. Cross inherits the liability with you. If regulators ask whether the bias was foreseeable, the answer will be yes. The paper trail will make sure of that. Julian looked at Ethan then, not angry, not dramatic, just deeply awake. Paper trail? Ethan asked. Maya's expression changed for the first time. Not much, just enough for the past to step into the room. 3 years ago, she said, someone sent your company a warning about this exact framework. Victoria went still. Daniel's fingers stopped above his keyboard. Ethan felt the air tighten around his collar. Maya looked directly at him, calm as dawn over a city that had not yet apologized. You did not read it, she said. But I wrote it. The words did not echo because the room was too expensive for echoes, but everyone felt them return anyway. You did not read it. But I wrote it. Ethan Caldwell stared at Maya as if she had just stepped out of a locked file cabinet inside his own company. For the first time that night, the silence was not about her place in the room. It was about his. Victoria Lane reached for her tablet with hands that moved a little too quickly. There must be some confusion, she said. We receive thousands of external submissions every year. Maya nodded. I know. Mine was not external. Daniel, the young analyst, looked up. What does that mean? Maya kept her eyes on Ethan. It means I was invited to interview for your ethics and risk division 3 years ago. I completed the case assessment. I flagged the same bias pattern in a prototype of this model. I submitted a 26-page memo with recommendations, legal exposure, and alternate weighting structures. She paused, and the pause did what anger could not. It gave the truth room to stand up straight. 2 weeks later, I received a rejection letter. Ethan's face tightened, but not with disbelief anymore. With memory trying to find a door. The kind of memory powerful men prefer to outsource to assistants, calendars, and human resources systems. Julian Cross turned toward Victoria. Can that be verified? Victoria did not answer fast enough. That was the answer before the answer. She opened a folder, tapped the screen, searched, swallowed, searched again. The jazz in the ceiling continued playing, soft and useless, while the room watched a woman in a white apron become more credible than an entire executive team. Maya did not move closer. She did not need to. The final note on my file said I was not executive material, she said. Ethan looked at Victoria. Victoria looked down. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, as though the words had embarrassed him on behalf of everyone who had ever sat in a hiring room and mistaken sameness for excellence. Julian's attorney stopped typing. Even the servers near the wall had gone still, trays balanced at their sides, their faces careful but awake. Because everyone who works in service knows that sentence, even if they have heard it in different clothing. Not polished enough. Not the right fit. Not aligned with the culture. Not ready for leadership. Words that sound professional when people are too afraid to say what they really mean. Ethan stepped away from the screen. His voice had lost some of its steel. I did not personally write that note. Maya looked at him with a calm that made the excuse feel smaller before it was finished. No, she said, but you built the room where that note made sense. That was the moment the dinner changed from uncomfortable to historic. Not loud. Not messy. Historic in the quiet way a door opens, and every locked-out person can hear the hinge. Ethan glanced at the menu where Maya had drawn the model by hand. He saw the arrows, the variables, the risk chain, the legal exposure, the clarity. Then he looked at the screen behind him, at the version his company had polished for investors. One was dressed in gold. The other was written on the back of a dinner menu. Only one was telling the truth. Julian stood slowly, buttoning his jacket. I am not signing tonight. Victoria's mouth opened. Ethan turned sharply. Julian. No, Julian said, calm as stone. Not until Dr. Brooks reviews the model, your hiring records, and whatever process allowed her warning to disappear. The title landed harder than the insult had. Dr. Brooks. Not Maya from the corner. Not sweetheart. Not the waitress with the water pitcher. Dr. Brooks. Ethan looked at her then, really looked, and the room watched recognition arrive too late to be graceful. Dr. Brooks. For a moment, The name seemed too large for the room that had tried to shrink her. It moved across the white linen, over the untouched plates, past the stunned executives, and settled somewhere Ethan Caldwell could not ignore. Maya did not correct Julian. She did not soften the title to make anyone comfortable. She had spent too many years watching people bend themselves into smaller shapes just to survive rooms like this. Tonight, she stood at her full height. Victoria Lane finally found the file. Everyone knew because her face changed before she spoke. The color drained from her polished confidence, leaving behind something thin and exposed. "There is an application record," she said carefully. Ethan turned toward her. "Read it." Victoria hesitated. That hesitation became its own confession. Julian's attorney lifted her tablet, ready to take notes. Daniel stared at the floor as if he wished the carpet could open and swallow the entire department that had trained him. Victoria cleared her throat. Maya Denise Brooks, Doctor of Philosophy, University of Chicago. Dissertation title, Predictive Bias and Executive Decision-Making in High-Stakes Markets. Finalist for the Westbrook Research Prize. Former fellow at the Center for Applied Ethics and Data Systems. The room did not gasp. It went quieter than that. Quieter than surprise. Quieter than shame. The kind of quiet that arrives when a lie dies in public. Ethan looked at Maya, and this time there was no easy category left for her. Not server. Not interruption. Not mistake. Not background. She was standing in front of him with the exact expertise his company had needed, wearing the uniform his world had taught him to dismiss. Victoria continued, her voice smaller with each line. Case assessment submitted June 14th. Reviewed by Ethics and Risk Hiring Panel. Internal comment attached. Ethan's eyes sharpened. "Read it." Victoria looked at Maya for the first time with something close to fear, not fear of Maya as a person, but fear of the truth she had carried quietly for 3 years. Candidate demonstrates strong technical insight, Victoria read, but does not project executive presence. May struggle with client-facing credibility. The words sat there like old dust shaken into sunlight. Client-facing credibility. Everyone understood. They understood the suit and tie language. They understood the soft machinery of exclusion. They understood how prejudice becomes a sentence polite enough to live in a personnel file. Maya looked down briefly, not because she was ashamed, but because memory had weight. 3 years earlier, she had left that interview in heels that rubbed blisters into both feet, carrying a folder full of research and a hope she had been embarrassed to admit even to herself. She had stood outside Caldwell Meridian's glass tower on Madison Avenue, watching employees badge through the revolving doors, telling herself the rejection was not the end. Then Samuel's accident happened. Bills arrived with cruel punctuality. Her mother's old apartment needed repairs. Opportunities became smaller. Night shifts became necessary. The world called it falling behind. Maya called it staying alive. Ethan heard none of that history, but he saw enough of it in her face to understand that the file was not paper. It was a wound with corporate formatting. Who wrote the comment? Julian asked. Victoria did not answer. Daniel whispered. It was approved by the Executive Review Office. Ethan's hand closed slowly around the remote. There was no dramatic collapse, no raised voice, no shattered glass. Just a billionaire realizing that an empire can fail quietly long before the market notices. It fails in the ignored memo, the dismissed candidate, the clever room that hires mirrors and rejects windows. Maya picked up the dinner menu with her handwritten model and placed it gently beside Ethan's untouched plate. "You did not lose my warning," she said. "You buried it under the kind of language that lets people sleep at night." Ethan stared at the page. The city lights behind him flickered in the glass like 1,000 witnesses. For the first time all evening, he did not look powerful. He looked informed. And somehow that was worse. The menu lay beside Ethan's plate like evidence no one had asked for, but everyone needed. Gold lettering at the top, blue ink beneath it. And in between those two things, the difference between a company that looked brilliant and a company that had almost signed its own scandal. Ethan did not touch it at first. His fingers hovered near the paper, then withdrew, as if the truth might burn him if handled too quickly. Julian Cross watched him with the patience of a man who had seen many executives fail, but rarely this quietly. Victoria Lane closed the personnel file on her tablet, but the damage had already escaped the screen. It was in the room now. It was in Daniel's lowered eyes. It was in the servers standing straighter near the wall. It was in the way every person who had ignored Maya Brooks suddenly understood that she had never been the smallest person in the room. Ethan looked up. "Dr. Brooks," he said, and the title sounded unfamiliar in his mouth, like a language he should have learned years ago. Maya waited. She did not rescue him from the discomfort. She had spent her whole life being asked to make other people feel comfortable after they disrespected her. Not tonight. Ethan swallowed. "What would you recommend?" The question was simple. It should have been asked 3 years earlier. Maya looked at the screen, then at Julian, then at the team that had built a model without seeing the people erased by its design. "First, you pause the deal," she said. Victoria made a small sound, but Julian raised one finger and she stopped. Maya continued. "Second, you freeze deployment until the training data is audited by an independent group with no financial incentive to protect your timeline. Third, you rebuild the model with fairness testing across income, race, housing stability, age, and regional access. Fourth, you document every internal warning that was dismissed and why." Daniel started typing before anyone told him to. That mattered. Sometimes change begins as obedience to truth before it becomes courage. Ethan nodded slowly. "And after that?" Maya's eye stayed on him. "After that, you stop calling bias an unintended consequence when it keeps benefiting the same people." No one breathed loudly. The sentence did not accuse one person. It indicted a culture, and cultures hate being named because names make them visible. Ethan looked at Victoria. "Cancel the signing." Victoria's expression tightened. "Ethan, the market response will be severe if this leaks before we control the narrative." Maya almost smiled, but not with humor. Control the narrative. Another polished phrase. Another expensive curtain. Julian leaned back. "The narrative is already controlled," he said. "By the facts." Then something happened near the far end of the room. One of the junior servers, a young black man named Marcus who had been refilling bread plates all evening without being addressed once, quietly set down his tray and looked at Maya with the kind of respect that does not need applause. She saw him. He looked away quickly, professional again, but the moment had already passed between them. It said what words could not. "We saw you stand. Maybe we can stand straighter too." Ethan picked up the menu at last. He studied Maya's handwriting, the arrows, the circled variables, the notes packed into the margins. This was not a performance. This was expertise under pressure. This was what his company had rejected because it had arrived in a form they did not know how to honor. "I owe you an apology," Ethan said. Maya's face did not change. "You owe more than that." The room tightened again. Ethan nodded once, because he knew she was right. "Name it." Maya looked through the glass at Manhattan shining 62 floors below, a city built by people whose names never appeared on the plaques. Then she turned back to him. "Not a job offer whispered after embarrassment," she said. "Not a check to make this disappear. Not a public relations statement about learning and growth." She placed one hand gently on the back of the chair beside her. "You create an independent ethics board with authority. You reopen every rejected application flagged under executive presence for the last 5 years. You give Daniel's team protection to tell the truth without losing their careers. And you apologize publicly, not because it helps your brand, but because it is the first honest thing your company can do." Ethan stared at her, speechless again, but this silence was different. The first silence had been arrogance losing balance. This one was a man hearing the cost of becoming better. Ethan Caldwell had spent 20 years learning how to win rooms, but no one had ever taught him how to surrender one with dignity. He stood at the head of the table, surrounded by the symbols that had always protected him. The skyline, the suit, the screen, the staff, the silence of people waiting for his decision. Only now, none of those things belonged to him the way they had before. Maya Brooks had not taken his power. She had revealed how fragile it was when separated from truth. Julian cross-checked his watch once, not because he was impatient, but because the hour had changed. Dinner was over. Something larger had begun. "Victoria," Ethan said, his voice low but steady. "Draft a notice. The signing is postponed pending an independent ethics and data review." Victoria stared at him as if he had spoken in a language that did not exist in executive rooms. Tonight. The word landed with the weight of a locked door opening. Daniel looked up from his laptop, startled by his own relief. Julian's attorney began writing again. At the wall, Marcus lifted his tray with both hands, but his shoulders were different now. A little higher, a little less invisible. Victoria's fingers moved across her tablet, each tap quieter than the last. For the first time all evening, the woman who had dismissed Maya as a distraction was taking orders from the truth Maya had brought into the room. Ethan turned back to Maya. "I cannot undo what happened 3 years ago," he said. Maya held his gaze. "No, you cannot." He nodded, accepting the sentence without defense. That mattered more than the apology he had not yet earned. "But I can open the records. I can bring an outside review. I can require every hiring panel to explain those phrases we have used to hide bias behind professional language." Maya studied him carefully. She had heard promises before. Some came wrapped in regret. Some came printed on company letterhead. Some were spoken beautifully and forgotten by morning. "Do not make this about me," she said. "That is how companies escape. They turn one overlooked person into a symbol, then keep the system that overlooked her." Ethan looked down at the menu in his hand. "Then help me make it about the system." The room tightened around that request. It sounded like a job offer, but Maya knew better than to grab what was handed to her in front of witnesses. Respect offered in embarrassment could become resentment in private. She had learned to read power the way some people read weather. "I will consult for the independent board for 90 days, she said. In writing, full authority to review the model, hiring records, and internal escalation process. Public disclosure of findings. No non-disclosure agreement that hides misconduct. No quiet settlement. No photograph of me shaking your hand before the work is done." Julian Cross smiled faintly, not amused, impressed. "Those are strong terms." Maya looked at him. They should have been standard ones. Ethan did not flinch this time. "Agreed." Victoria's head snapped toward him. "Ethan, legal will need to review. Legal can review my agreement to stop making the same mistake twice," he said. It was not a grand speech. It was better than that. It was a sentence with a spine. Maya saw Daniel pause over the keyboard, as if hearing permission for honesty in a place that had punished it quietly. Ethan faced the room, not just Julian, not just Maya, but everyone. Executives, attorneys, analysts, servers, every witness his pride had tried to reduce to background. "Dr. Brooks was right," he said. "About the model. About the warning. About the culture that ignored her. I was wrong to dismiss her. This company was wrong to dismiss her. And before we ask anyone else to trust our judgment, we are going to prove we have learned how to question it." No applause came. Applause would have been too easy. What came instead was stillness, the rare kind that follows the first honest sentence in a room built on performance. Maya picked up the water pitcher again, not because she had to, but because she refused to let their shame define her work. She filled Ethan's glass halfway, set the pitcher down, and said, "Then start by listening before the room forces you to." By the time the private elevator opened again, the Aurelia room no longer felt like a restaurant. It felt like the scene after a storm, when the windows are still wet, the streets are still shining, and everyone knows the weather has changed even if no one says it yet. The plates were cleared quietly. The wine went unfinished. The $600 million agreement remained signed inside a leather folder near Julian Cross, its clean pages suddenly less impressive than the marked-up dinner menu beside Ethan Caldwell's glass. Maya Brooks stood near the service station, her apron still tied, her name tag still catching the light, but nothing about her belonged to the background anymore. People were careful around her now, but she did not mistake caution for respect. Respect was not silence after humiliation. Respect was action after recognition. Julian stopped beside her before leaving. "Dr. Brooks," he said, offering his card with both hands. "When this board is formed, I would like my office to cooperate fully." Maya accepted the card. "Then make sure your office listens to the people the model was trained to ignore." Julian nodded, and for once, the richest man near the door had nothing clever to add. Victoria Lane passed next, her tablet held against her chest like a shield that no longer worked. She looked as if she wanted to apologize, but the words never came. Maya watched her go without bitterness. Some people needed time to understand that silence was not forgiveness. Daniel lingered longer. The young analyst approached with his laptop tucked under one arm, face pale, but honest. "I saw the variance issue," he said quietly. "I should have pushed harder." Maya studied him for a moment. "Then push harder next time while the person telling the truth is still in the room." Daniel nodded, and this time, he did not look away. After midnight, the restaurant emptied into a hush of polished floors and dimmed chandeliers. Ethan remained by the window, staring down at Manhattan as if seeing the city from 62 floors up had suddenly become less impressive than seeing one person clearly. Maya untied her apron at the service station. Her shift had ended 20 minutes earlier. Her feet hurt. Her brother Samuel would be asleep by now, and in the morning he would ask how the dinner went, expecting nothing more dramatic than a rude guest and sore shoulders. He would not yet know that his sister had stopped a billion-dollar mistake with a pen, a menu, and a voice everyone had been trained to underestimate. Ethan turned when she passed. "Maya," he said, then corrected himself. "Dr. Brooks." She stopped, but only halfway. He took a breath. "I am sorry." The words were simple. Late. Not enough. But real enough to stand alone. Maya looked at him, not with triumph, not with softness, but with the steady dignity of a woman who had learned not to beg the world to recognize what was already true. "Do not spend tomorrow telling people you discovered me," she said. "You did not. I was never hidden. You were not looking." Ethan had no answer, and maybe that was the first honest ending the night could offer. Maya walked toward the service elevator, past Marcus, who gave her a small nod filled with more respect than the room had managed all evening. She stepped inside as the doors began to close, holding Julian's card in one hand and her folded apron in the other. Behind her, Ethan stood alone beneath the glow of his own skyline, speechless not because he had lost control, but because he had finally understood what control had cost him. He had respected degrees when they came framed on office walls. He had ignored wisdom when it came carrying water. And that night, a black waitress did not ask for a seat at his table. She made the whole room rise to meet her.